So, today is our live session number two, where we're discussing compassion fatigue and supporting the mental health professionals that deal with it, how they struggle with it, overcoming those struggles, and what are some strategies that we can help enable them to get to the next step in that process, right? So, really important topic this week, and really happy to be here again. Beautiful team. We have Jillian, who's our star extraordinaire, our Shiro, right? She wears a cape every day for us in the sales and marketing department. Mike Kippern, Chief Revenue Officer, arguably nothing more important, right? Allison Adams, the person that will bite your head off if you're late. It'll keep you straight if you need guidance and correction, and puts the guardrails in place that allows this company to function like a Fortune 100. Thank you for joining, guys. Thank you for popping in and assisting us with this new journey, and really happy to get into it, right? So, mental health professionals are healers, right? But who heals them? And that's the conversation, right? From a compassion fatigue standpoint, it's a real big issue. Nobody really talks about it. It's swept under the rug. These are the types of conversations that happen in EAPs, right? That happen in counseling sessions for the counselor. So we see this predominantly with direct care staff that is on the front lines of care, especially the mental and behavioral health sector, but largely the health and human services sector. Today, we'll cover the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. We'll also talk about warning signs that you should never ignore. And we'll talk about steps to mitigate loss and support the employees when it comes from an engagement standpoint, right? So what are some strategies that we can use to uplift, embrace what's happening, and empower them to get through it? And essentially, that'll probably take us through the hour as we formulate meaningful banter around these different subject points, right? So anybody want to chime in as we get started? Soft intros, anything? If not, I'll start jumping right in.
I'm just so glad we're talking about burnout in general because I think so often it's worn as like a badge of honor. If you don't have your burnout badge on, are you really trying hard enough? But
Right,
there's so many other ways to be successful without getting to that point.
right. And I agree. I mean, in some cultures, like the Japanese culture, burnout is a sign of, like you said, it's a badge of honor. It's a sign of dedication. In Southeastern Asian countries, we see that burnout is encouraged. And if you don't get to the point of, complete burnout, then they don't see you as working hard enough. And some of that, Eastern work culture has crept in the Western society as well. And even, when it comes to what we think of as a hardworking person, someone tells you they're working 80 hours. I mean, immediately you start to form opinions about, how dedicated they are, how passionate they are. But that's not always the truth, is it? Working a lot doesn't equate to efficiency. And now with like the advent of the conversation gearing towards the 3 to 4 day work week, that started to transform how culture is shifted around COVID time. That really lends itself to even more large, scale conversation around what can you do in the least amount of time, right? Cutting out all the fluff, all the 2 hour lunch breaks, all the naps in between. And we're saying, hey, give me an 8 to 4 work day and execute at a high level, right? So that's starting to be the new standard. But still, burnout is prevalent in all our workplaces. In this particular field, we see it rear its ugly head in different ways of being less effective for the substance abuse counseling sessions that they start to lead, the group therapy sessions that, start to have people peel away because they're not getting the engagement as high, right? And when it comes to burnout and compassion fatigue, sometimes the service notes are a good indicator. So service notes are simply when a counselor, a therapist, a licensed professional, or a clinician is done with their session, right? It could be substance abuse, it could be behavioral health, or specifically mental health, and they're providing treatment or therapy or counseling. They have to write down what happened. They have to give a narrative, and they have to make sure they're tracking the results of that session, right? Because this is essentially their treatment. In that way, service notes tracking them, they become less specific, they become overdue, right? If a company standard is, hey, service notes have to come in by 48 hours after the session, we see them, they go 4 or 5 days without putting the service note in. And you can't bill Medicaid or Medicare without the service note attached to the billing. Otherwise, that's going to pop up an audit, a red flag, and no company wants that. So what we start to see is when these counselors and therapists and professionals in this field get burnt out, they start to have compassion fatigue, which are two separate things, but one is a product of the other. You start to understand that from a billable standpoint, the billable service notes, the money and the return on investment starts to immediately be impacted. If you take longer to submit a billable service note, which is how we get paid, then the company takes longer to recoup or get the reimbursement from Medicaid or Medicare, or even a private pay session. And if you take longer to do that, then that could further extrapolate the finances and stretch the finances of that company. If they have to make weekly payroll and you didn't submit a note that week, well, that means the company didn't get reimbursed in a timely manner. So if they don't have the cash flow consistently in their bank account to keep up with payroll and operational expenses while you're taking that extra time as a counselor, clinician, or therapist for that billable service note to be populated properly, then ultimately it hurts. It hurts the pockets of these companies, right? Especially the solo practices or the 2 or 3 or the network built practices or clinical services. So these service providers, they don't have a bunch of money a lot of times, right? 80% of service providers never hit the 1 million mark in revenue. So if you're feeling like you are tired, you need to take a break, right? Reset. Ask for an EAP, which is a counseling session that is private. It's anonymous a lot of times. You can call into a hotline and have a therapist, a counselor, talk to you about what you're going through. That's a really easy way to generate a clean slate, right? We all need that sometimes. I know for me, therapy has been one of the top asks of recruitment partners when I'm talking about how do I poach a clinician from one company to the next, right? So they ask about what that relationship is like because they know they'll need it. So it's really important. Behavioral health clinicians, supervisors, peer support staff, tailored care management staff, all these different programs that involve direct connection with patients or members of a society where they have a lot of trauma, right? It really makes it hard to take on, like we talked about this a little bit last week. We have a caseload of 10 to 12 people, 10 to 15 people. You have to listen to each one's story. Each one has a complex life, trauma-filled childhood a lot of times, right? They're dealing with substance abuse or mental health issues or behavioral health problems that lead them to make decisions on a daily that, you have to unpack with them. Get them to see that, hey, they're going down the wrong path. You want to turn the car around. But essentially, you're fighting with them. You're fighting with their addiction. You're fighting with their problem. And you're not fighting with the person, but you're trying to reach deep inside of people. Sometimes you got an hour to reach deep inside of people. And in a week, you're expected to have a caseload of 10 to 12 people. That's a lot. That's a lot of fighting and grasping and pulling straws. And even the best therapists, the best counselors need to take a second, even in between sessions, right? And just take our team, for example, right? We do a bunch of interviews, and Google and Microsoft have it now to where if they see you schedule a bunch of interviews, they'll add a buffer in. They'll add like a 15-minute break in there for you, even into your schedule. And similarly, taking that approach when it comes to how we treat the scheduling of clinicians when it comes to back-to-back sessions, that's something that we can be more intentional about, right? So if you have 3 hours of therapy time scheduled, a lot of times it's more than that. Stipulate like a substance abuse comprehensive outpatient treatment in North Carolina is a 4-hour at least program, right? So you're in therapy sessions, group settings for 4 hours, and you might have up to 10 people in front of you. And you have a curriculum that you're following, but essentially you got 10 personalities, 10 souls, 10 complicated childhoods, 10 trauma-induced, mindsets, 10 addictions, 10 pattern of dysfunctions in front of you. And 4 hours out of an 8 hour workday, you have to at least be in that setting. A lot of times it's longer. Let's say 5 to 6 hours. You take an hour to get ready for them to arrive. You take 30 minutes to an hour to get ready for them for their to leave, and then you have a break in between. So that means that that's probably about 6 hours of the day you spent in and around that. The other 2 hours, well, you have a pile of notes to do for each of the individuals in your group. And then you still have to get prepared to leave and then go drive to wherever you live. And then that's where life starts for you. So a lot of times, this is the life that a therapist lives. This is their life's work. And it's important that where they work has a mindset that, hey, we know what their day is like. So this is the strategies that we're going to be intentional about putting in to our company, even if it costs us a little bit more money, to make sure that we're taking care of our people. And this, like I said, last week we talked about one of the strategies is taking a day of therapy off of their schedule, and it could be once a week, bi-weekly, monthly. But a day that they would normally come in expected, geared up with their therapy armor on, with their notepad in hand, ready to hand out the curriculum for these people. And you can make it an unexpected, clear scheduled day. They would do something else not related to the direct hand-to-hand combat, so to speak. They would do another part of the business. They would catch up on notes. They would iron out, the curriculum for next week, right? Maybe they catch up on webinars or join a session similar to this where they're just learning about what the company could do to be better for them. That's a good use of their time. If they're prepared to work and they come in and they get a surprise that they don't necessarily have to face the same challenge, essentially, wouldn't that make you happy? That I know for me, if I came in expected to do some hard work today and they said, hey guys, we're doing something else. Man, I feel like a kid in the candy store, right? I mean, you feel great. And it's a little bit different. It's not the same as scheduling something like a month in advance. It's not the same as that. That surprise element takes a load off of them mentally. And that's an aspect where the company would pre-plan, but not necessarily put the therapist in that planning cycle with them. Now, if an organization did that, it's a weight off of the shoulders, right? It's a welcome surprise that is like, okay, they really do care, right? And then from that standpoint, you just start to prove all the things that you talk about from a retention standpoint. So that's a really easy win for a company to jump into. Mike, if you came to work one day and your schedule was cleared and they said, hey, we're not worried about that. This is what we're going to do. But we see you've been putting in the hours. You've been doing your thing. We want to help, though. And here's what you can do instead. And you can control your schedule today. You got 4 different options to choose from. You want to sit in front of the TV and look at some training materials. You want to organize your desk. You want to go take a extra long lunch break. Or do you just want to go home, take your kids to the park today and get some ice cream? Or whatever you feel like would help you today, but we got you covered. How would that make you feel?
Well, I would have a mix of emotions. I think initially I would be taken aback and just thinking to myself, wow, what am I going to do now? But after that initial kind of shock and processing, that shows to me that I'm truly valued. Mm-hmm. My employer, my manager, whomever, they care enough about me that they want me to focus on things that are important and valuable to me outside of my normal day-to-day responsibilities.
Right.
Because obviously I gain significant satisfaction from the day-to-day work.
Yep.
It's motivating in of itself. Yep. However, no, that's not the end all be all.
Right.
And for especially to be presented with options in this particular hypothetical, that it just shows how much I'm cared for, and that in of itself would be refreshing, more so than even a 2-week vacation.
Yeah. I mean, it's a 2-week vacation is, something you got to have money for, first of all. Your family has implications, right? Maybe you're not even prepared to take a vacation. You just want a break. So you feel obligated to vacate. You might just like your home enough, though, to where you don't want to go anywhere. And when people learn that you haven't taken advantage of that time, they kind of look at you like, okay, well, you just took vacation to relax at home here. I'm like, yeah, I did. But you make some good points, man. And that's what shines through. And that's what we see when employers use this strategy. Their employees, their counselors, their licensed professionals, they feel valued. they feel empowered, they feel essentially cared for, right? And that is just enough to help reset their panic meter when it comes to where they are from a burnout standpoint, right? Allison, how would that make you feel?
Same as what Mike had to say, but it has triggered a thought around a conversation I had a handful of years ago on a long train journey in Norway. And this gentleman across the aisle started talking with my husband and I, fascinated by American culture and all these questions around living in America. And it turned into this such an insightful conversation. He really talked about the Norwegian culture and how their view is that Americans live to work. And in Norway, they work to live. And a full-time work week to them is 35 hours. And oftentimes they look at Americans and say, what's wrong with you that you can't get your job done in 35 or 40 hours? And in Norway, they approach it as holistically, every person is going to deliver the best work if they're viewed as a whole human being with needs and values and different things that are important to them. So as a part of their process with their supervisor every year, it's to talk about what drives them as a human. What do they need? And they're comfortable talking about, for me, it's time with my family, or it's certain work hours, or it's being acknowledged, or having flexibility around my schedule. And, that's not viewed as a negative, but each person, is committed to doing a great job. And just because they want to work 30 or 35 hours a week and get their job done in that time doesn't mean they're not committed. Doesn't mean that they're not loyal.
Yeah.
But they feel quality in Norway is critical, and they take their jobs very seriously. But they also know they can't deliver quality work without a balance, without being valued, without their supervisor understanding what helps make them tick. And like you said, it's that ability as a supervisor to say, gosh, you've been doing an outstanding job lately. Please take the rest of the day and go spend time with your family. So, just as we were talking about, other cultures, we're in America, that's the land in which we live, but I think we can take the best from other cultures and, companies and leaders that are able to look and say, how do I help somebody do the absolute best job they can with all the things that they need? That's what my job is. And it may be removing obstacles. It may be helping them create a safe space, a balance and diversity in their work or time away from work. And, I hope we can create more of that in this company, not only for us, but also all those that we touch, because the additional burden that mental health and mental and behavioral health professionals have is an emotional load that they have to help carry for everybody they take care of. And so, maybe looking at some things differently or doing some of the things that you talked about will be able to help them do their job well by having different outlets or support or perspective around things.
Hey, you cut out there at the end.
I don't
I'm
have
sorry.
anything else to add.
Okay, Gotcha. No, so, yeah, and it's important, right? And that goes back to the cultural conversations, right? So the culture of these clinics, right, are a lot of times hustle culture, right? And a capitalistic society that has built itself up by being better than the next company, being better than the next person or the next man or woman, right? That competition is also what leads to the burnout. So yes, you might go, up the ladder, but essentially you'll crash very fast and won't have sustainability and staying power. If you want to be a clinician and retire as one with your mentality still intact, strong, and your compassion level still high, your empathy level still high, you got to pace yourself, right? There's something to be said for companies that last for 25, 50, 60 years than the ones that come in, pop in, buy up every resource, use up all their people, then fade away in 10 to 12 years. I would rather, and I'm sure a lot of companies feel like this, I would rather earn consistently and be comfortable over a quarter century, 50 years, than just a very quick ebb and flow. So a part of our job when we're getting installed into a company's culture and downloading the who's who and what's what of a company, in the mental and behavioral health field, learning about what their strengths and weaknesses are, learning about what props their culture up and what their values are. Not only what they put on paper from a mission statement standpoint, but what they exhibit and how they treat their employees. One of the most important things is how they deal with compassion fatigue versus burnout, right? So burnout is a cumulative chronic workplace issue, while compassion fatigue is specifically dealing with the emotional and mental loads of the people and the caseloads that you take on as a clinician. Logical exhaustion is completely different from the deep fatigue from a physical standpoint, from the working the long hours and getting up in the early mornings. There is, fine line between the two. It's specific. It's the same thing as like, if you work a certain job, you get certain, like, for example, if you cook in front of a hot grill, of course you're gonna get certain burn marks and scars and those types of things, versus somebody that is a cook but in the kitchen as a dishwasher. Yeah, you're gonna have your scrapes and your burns, but you don't get them in the same way. They don't show up in the same way. They're similar. You have similar issues, but they come from different places. They show up in different ways. So, that's kind of how I visualize that. Would you agree with that, Jillian, a bit? That contrast and comparison?
Absolutely. I was just sitting here like taking down some notes. I thought it was so good.
Yeah. So, compassion fatigue, it really hits the heart, right? It's not about just being tired. It's about being depleted from constant caregiving, right? And that's what the counselors feel. It rears its ugly head with a therapist feeling numb towards clients, not giving them, this week they didn't give many methods or much feedback, even though they heard that from that client that they had been thinking about relapsing. They didn't do a hard redirect, right? It was more of a softer approach. Okay, well, what did you learn from this and why? But not that, heart-led approach, person-centered approach that would allow that person to completely look at themselves in the mirror that week. That's a difference in the treatment that they got, right? You didn't do a hard correct there because you couldn't. It's not that you didn't want to. So also, like a supervisor losing empathy for other team members or in the way of team dysfunction, kind of allowing it to happen, right? That's another way that this shows up. Also, a peer support worker feeling irritable or detached, right? They're in the community working. They're going to see their caseload members or patients, but when they show up, they're short with them. They're not spending an hour. They're spending 38 minutes, right? They're short. They're taking notes saying this person just isn't. The service notes speak to it. They're just not doing, they're not following the program. I asked them to come prepared with, with the, two family members that they think they can turn to in a time of crisis. They gave me one and that type of thing, right? That's how that shows up. So, and it's really important to understand the warning signs and the symptoms, because to solve something means you understand it. And if you don't understand something that you think you solved, you'll never know if you got to the answer, right? So that's why they used to tell you, show your work. Back then now they don't use a lot of paper and pencil. But when I was doing math, they didn't care if I got to the right answer. They wanted to see the methodology, right? And this is the way that we operate when we're trying to deal with problems head on. There's a lot of HR companies, a lot of professionals in our field that they take the I got the right answer approach. And all they want to do is look at the retention numbers, the attrition rate. If they see certain numbers go up, they see certain numbers go down. Oh, we don't have a lot of recruiting to do. There's not a lot of open roles. Well, that's not necessarily emblematic of your success if you can't replicate it and scale it, right? So our strategic partnership allows us to help scale with identifiable ways and measures to deal with widespread issues in the context of a trauma-informed mental and behavioral health system that we completely understand. So it all circles back to a level of knowledge that we're prepared to deploy on your behalf. Looking beyond just the numbers. Yes, numbers are important to us, and we'll make sure that, we'll keep them as high as we can, and we'll keep the other ones as low as we can. But if we can't replicate it, and if we don't understand why, then we can't take credit for it, and we shouldn't, at least. And then what's going to happen is you're going to ask us to help scale, and the numbers won't transpose over, see a drop off, and then you'll ask why. And we're going to give you a lot of companies, this, that, and the third. But the truth is, if you really had a deep understanding of the numbers, what they meant, what they signified, and the people behind the numbers, then, you'd be able to execute at a higher level. So, a white glove firm like us, that's the difference between the run-of-the-mill HR companies and us, right? So moving on. So warning signs and symptoms, right? They even go down to a physical standpoint, right? When you're burnt out, aren't you less engaged and active in meetings, right? Versus when you have compassion fatigue, you have trouble concentrating in your sessions. There's a fogginess in your sessions. You have trouble staying awake in your therapy and counseling sessions, right? And of course, just like in meetings where regular professionals would be less engaged or detached, we find in therapy sessions that the same thing applies. The fogginess, the sleepiness, you'll find them yawning multiple times throughout a session. From a behavior standpoint, they'll be avoiding clients. They'll be withdrawing from the team. Their performance will have decreased. So when you see, okay, they have 10 counseling sessions scheduled this week. A licensed professional. Her name is Tasha. She has to see 10 clients this week. One of them no-showed. The next one was a little late, right? That 5-minute late grace period, instead of being graceful, allowing them to enter, get settled in, and still taking them, they turn their compassion meter off because they're compassion fatigue. And what they do is they say, you're late. We'll have to see you next week. We got to reschedule, right? That's not, come on now, Tasha doesn't do that. She's been the one, she always works with people, right? When she first started, she was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. People come in 20 minutes late. She's willing to still get them in. She'll push back the other one, make the calls. In that moment, in that 20 minutes that they were arriving, she was texting. She understood where they were. Oh, you ride a Memorial Drive. Great. There's traffic. I understand. You had a flat tire. Cool. I mean, they're in the business of therapy, right? So they have to be compassionate. But when a clinician is compassion fatigued, they stop extending that hand. They stop giving that grace period. It's putting these hard boundaries in place under the guise of this is the policy. But in reality, they're dealing with them with a long stick, right? And that's just one of the symptoms that we see in this particular, when it comes to compassion fatigue. Had a little bit of brain fart there. Spiritually, what we see is like they have a loss of purpose, right? There's a lot of companies that have a spiritual aspect to their counseling services, right? You ever had a grandmother or a father or grandfather, you sit at the big table on the Sundays, they ask you to bow your head, hold hands, and then they say a prayer, and when this person gets allowed to pray, my goodness, it's gonna be long. My grandmother Listra, God bless her heart, she says some of the longest prayers, and you can almost hear about halfway through people's stomachs start to sing. I mean, the food is smelling great, we're holding hands, but before we dig in, we gotta say the prayer. And if she's the one that says it, she's going to thank everyone that ever brought the onion. She's going to thank the person that squeezed the oranges, that was able to, turn the handle, that mixed the sugar, that made the orange juice, right? It's everyone involved. But when a counselor or therapist is compassion fatigue, they don't do that anymore. And so these are small, subtle signs, right? They're questioning their meaning, their self-worth, if they even want to continue in this field. Spiritually, they just lose their sense of belonging. If they were long prayer warriors before, that gets truncated, cut off, shortened. They're disconnected, if they even want to pray at all. And it's just because, sometimes that's what it does. It gets you off your square, right? Compassion fatigue is not burnout. When you burnt out, a lot of times you get closer to God. You get closer to your spiritual center. You get closer to your relationship with your counselor or your pastor or your minister, your reverend. Compassion fatigue is different because it doesn't show up in the same way as burnout. You can even work, you don't have to work 80 hours to feel fatigued in that way from a compassion standpoint. Just one of the telltale signs that there's a difference there, right? And if they check 2 or 3 of those boxes, we understand that's something that we got to connect with them on, right? And get them to see what they're even going through. A lot of times, as HR professionals, we have to make the call because compassion fatigue is not a word combination a lot of people even hear of. Young clinicians, young social workers, they don't understand the root causes, right? So that brings me to my next point, right? So the chronic exposure to trauma and crises is going to heighten this. If you have a young social worker, just got their license, a young licensed professional just became fully licensed, right? They were being supervised and handheld and always working with someone, but this is their first step into their full licensure. They got high caseloads, they have low autonomy. The place that they work is systemically underfunded, right? So they're always bootstrapped. Turnover is high for the staff. These are all things that we got to look for. And when we see these different things, we have to ask ourselves, what's the impact long-term and short-term? Long-term might be burnout, short-term compassion fatigue, right? And like I said, 2 different things, 2 different causeways, 2 different levels of understanding. Lack of true recovery time between sessions, like we talked about when we first started. Also, like the cultural messaging that self-care is selfish. Allison, you spoke about the messaging that this culture puts forward in the workplace, right? Largely capitalistic society. Self-care is seen as something, the company's supposed to take care of you. Well, you can also request to help take care of yourself. Take a mental health day. No one has to know that you call it that, right? And these conversations, with your HR professional or with us, if we're the leads at your company, they're going to be organized and we don't, confidential. And so a lot of times people, it's just a mental health day. We don't get that. She's tired. She's only been here a year. I've been here for 4 years and I'm still going, different strokes, different folks, doesn't make them any less, doesn't make them any less effective, doesn't make them any less powerful, And then from the standpoint of if there's any leadership gaps, if there's any lack of emotional safety at work, this just leads even more to that. So all these different roadmaps, boxes checked, that's just going to keep leading down the unfortunate path of having a counselor burn out, both emotionally, internally, and from a compassion standpoint, just fatigued, right? So now we've talked about the systemic issues that cause it, some of the widespread things to look for, some of the root issues, and what the end result is in the life and the work life of a clinician, a therapist. Let's talk about, recovery and boundaries now. Let's talk about some of the things that we can do to help them get to the other side of it and put boundaries in place to avoid it. But before we do, let's do a quick check-in on time. Right now, it's 12:40. Okay, so we got about 20 minutes left. We're looking good. Anybody want to add any input to anything mentioned so far? Mike, what do you think about some of the telltale signs? Have you experienced these signs as an HR director for the last 12, 15 years? Have you ever, looking back on it, could you assign yourself a time where you might have been compassion fatigued and didn't know it?
I do think that there were some times over the years where maybe the values were a little bit lower and feeling a bit more burned out than others. But it's a lot of it is finding it inside of yourself to understand that this is not permanent. It's a journey. Can't always be the good times. That's just not realistic.
Yeah.
I think one of the hard truths about burnout and compassion fatigue is that they rarely show up as just pure exhaustion at first. Oftentimes they're showing up as detachment, disengagement, some of the things you talked about.
Yeah.
And, if we're not we're not paying close enough attention, that, disconnect, that slowly, becomes just the new norm. And that's when we've lost the battle, unfortunately. And that's why any type of real meaningful approach to building a culture around care and compassion, it has to go beyond just, surface level.
Yeah.
The free pizza on Fridays, sure, that's welcome, of course, but you need to be able to address the emotional sustainability of the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we talked about last week was the buddy system, that peer support. So that's creating that type of culture. It doesn't take tens of thousands of dollars. Just creating a shared space where clinicians can speak candidly amongst peers. That's where things can get heavy and things can be light. And that's the point. These buddy systems and just peer debriefs, group settings that can help to boost that engagement, especially for those who we may be seeing some of that detachment.
Yeah.
This is a great way to increase that engagement. Put them with peers as opposed to me.
Yeah, for sure. I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Sometimes we don't, as we look back on our careers and we reflect about where we were at certain points, and and sometimes as I look back, as I study this topic and this subject, there's been times where I felt it, and even still now on a daily, right, from a 12-day uptime, 15-hour uptime period, that last hour or two, I'm just peeking in, and response time, if I'm being honest, is different when it comes to the end of the day versus the beginning of the day. And when it comes to clinicians that act within the same protocol, if they had a crisis when they were compassion fatigued at the end of a long day versus in the beginning of the day before they had any therapy sessions to enter into, well, that's when we see and we start to notice that compassion fatigue and burnout is actually a workplace hazard. Right? Companies don't understand it's in their best interest to deploy strategies that help mitigate these circumstances, because the patients, the members, they suffer. If I get a call and I'm fatigued, I'm not Johnny on the spot, right? That's the difference between me recognizing an overdose victim or getting a call from somebody who is right on the precipice and they're just calling just to check in, just to hear some supporting, encouraging words. And I don't have it in me to give it to them with the same fervor that they're used to, that I may have given it to them, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 hours ago. That can be the difference between life and death for the people that rely on them for their emotional support, So it's not just something that's nice to have, and companies should worry about it whenever they can. They got a pile of money left and they start to think about employee engagement. This is one of those things, one of the nice to haves, but not a must have. This is a life or death situation in many cases. And it's, like I said, it's a workplace hazard, and workplace hazards fall on the company to reduce and ultimately stem the tide of, right? So I want to talk about 5 different practical tools that clinicians could actually use on a day-to-day to get past compassion fatigue without leading to burnout, right? Number 1, compassion recharge. This is a 3 to 5 minute session in between therapy or counseling sessions where they take time to recharge or reset, right? That could be a mantra. That could be, a pep talk. That could be an internal ego check. That could be, rubbing your eyebrows or tapping, whatever it takes to. These little micro practices between sessions allow you to reset mentally. It doesn't matter what you do physically, but it matters the mental part, right? Number 2, ending sessions with a ritual release. This is a similar thing, but a ritual release, meaning that this can take place a lot of times with the patient or the member, where you say, hey, we just talked about something very important. We're going to grab hands. We're going to look each other in the eye and say, I will be better. Repeat after me. I will be better. I would not allow these things to overcome me. I will be better. I will be stronger. I will be, whatever. That's a example of ending the session with a ritual release. Okay. 3 is scheduling buffer blocks between highly traumatic individuals or high impact, sessions, right? So you can't always jump into the next one. The therapeutic sessions could be very impactful, right? And when you have high risk patients, highly traumatic caseloads, you have to understand they're not all made equally. I'm going to see, Gerald. Gerald is high risk, high behavior. He's right on the precipice and he takes a lot out of me as a counselor. I know after him, I can't just jump to Jonas because Jonas is similar in that regard. And for them to get the best version of me, for me to be the most effective, I need to put a buffer, right? I need to put, I need to have time in between, or I need to put a low risk, maybe patient or member in between these high intensity cases to make sure I'm showing up in the right way, right? Because my effectiveness cannot drop off. I cannot let this compassion fatigue overtake me. And that means if I'm going to show up in a real way for them, then I have to be mindful of that, right? And that's something your clinical supervisor, your clinical director will be able to help these young clinicians with the understanding that they have the full support of the organization with this type of scheduling, right? Number 4, color coding your emotional bandwidth, right? So when you're done with the session, red, green, or yellow, right? How are you feeling? You feeling energized? You feeling passionate? You feeling brought down? You feeling weak? That's a red. If you're feeling like you need to pause in between the next session, that's a red. If you're feeling like you're limping to the next one, but you're still able to make it, you need to go a little slower, that's maybe yellow, right? Triage nurses and people in the healthcare facilities, they do this. It's actually a triage response in a lot of ER rooms. They do this. When they see a gunshot wound, a guy comes in riddled with bullets, 4 in the leg, 2 in the chest, 1 in the head, and they got to save his life. That's a red for these triage nurses, right? This is something, if they see a brother or cousin or family member, that's a red. They don't move on to the next patient. They take a 10 to 15-minute break, right? They go to the back, speak to the counselor, schedule a session, they have a 30-minute break in between that next patient because to save the next life, they got to bring their full self, right? Same thing with these mental behavioral health clinicians. They need the time. They need to be effective, and each life matters. So that means understanding and saying that person is a red for me, right? I've seen them. That used to be my daughter's teacher. A lot of time these community-based organizations, there's people from the community. And if you know and love that community, lived in it, you recognize that person was my 3rd grade teacher's, brother. I remember the last name, right? So that's color coding your emotional bandwidth is number 4. And the 5th way is just learning to say no or not yet to critical clinical boundary points, right? So the caseload is too full. I know the service definition says you can take 10. Your emotional boundaries allow you to tell your clinical director, your clinical supervisor, your owner, your manager that, hey, 6 or 7 is right for me at this time. I'm having things going on at home. My kids are dealing with some issues. They need me. My husband needs me. My spouse needs me. My sister is whatever. 6 or 7 is right for me right now, right? I have high impact cases. These are highly volatile. These are high intensity. 6 or 7 of these is good for me right now, right? When I feel better, I'll let you know. Check in with me in a month, right? And that type of boundary setting is prevalent. A lot of times we see that in experienced clinicians, but not the younger ones. And this is why there's a 50,000 person deficit in just the state of North Carolina when it comes to organizational planning, when it comes to caseload planning. People are dropping out of the health and human services dichotomy because they don't get the support they need oftentimes. Right? There's a provider shortage. Like I said, in North Carolina alone, is 50,000 is the estimated number of providers needed to meet the need of the people that actually would use their services right now if they were available. So what does that mean for you as a clinician? It means your caseload has to be bigger to make up for the 50K people that don't serve alongside you. The service definition is going to increase, allow for 10 to 15 in some cases. If you can only take 6 or 7, 3 or 4 because of where you are to avoid compassion fatigue, burnout, then that's okay, right? It has to be okay. Save 6 lives instead of endangering 12. So That's the way. And those are 5 practical tools. Let's rehash just for. So compassion recharge, ending sessions with a ritual release. Number 3, scheduling buffer blocks, right? Number 4, color coding your emotional bandwidth. Number 5, learning to say no or not yet. And those 5 things is a good start. It's not the end all be all, but it's a good start to installing a system that prevents you from being non-compassionate, fatigued, burnt out. And this is how we deal with that, right? Thoughts. What do you guys think about that?
I think those are great tips and tools. I think one thing that's worth stating is the importance of awareness. And self-awareness is critical for people to be able to, put their hand up and say, hey, I need a little space, or I'm dealing with a lot, or, can I get some support? And that's important. The other piece is observing things that you see. And sometimes we all see behaviors or responses in people and we go, well, that's not normally them.
Yep.
And we don't say anything and we let it go. But oftentimes those symptoms are part of a bigger issue or need, and not letting that, just go and stopping and checking in with somebody. Hey, is there anything I can do for you? How are you doing? Whether it's a peer, whether it's your supervisor, somebody that works for you. I think that's really important because not everybody has the ability or comfort to say, hey, I need some help.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can facilitate that conversation just by being aware and stopping and asking a question or lending an ear when we see something that isn't characteristic.
Yeah. I mean, we got to open up the floor proverbially for these types of things to get pushed through, right? I mean, it's remarkable what a culture of openness and transparency and people first mentality would do for the workforce, right? And that's why we lead the way we do. Because we understand when a person feels like they have permission to be excellent, and is pushed that way, well, that person impacts their family, right? When that family feels like they are empowered to shoot beyond the stars, they impact their community. When that community, feels like they can do anything together, that's how you change the world. And essentially, we've seen it happen. Right? We've seen somebody save a life, pay it forward in the drive-through. The person behind starts, the person behind them goes. We've seen, protests with different attitudes shift things, right? Either negatively or positively. So, what we put out there, essentially from a business standpoint, what companies encourage has a long-reaching effect on what actually happens in the lives of the people they employ. As strategic workforce partners, we hope to continue to push the initiative forward, get them to understand first these deep-rooted beliefs surrounding what their workforce is facing, the challenges and circumstances, and then from there, get them to act, right? And help them by showing them the ROI, mapping it out strategically. This is how you do it, rolling out the red carpet in a way, and then allowing space and time to do the rest of the work. But essentially, compassion fatigue, burnout, mental health, behavioral health, these things, this is what happens. And I'm glad we were able to talk about different strategies to solve this thing as best we can, right? These will always be problems, and there'll always be different methods and strategies to take care of it. But I hope today, if a clinician reading the transcript from this or rehashing the video replay of this would be able to take something from it, it would be the strategies that they're not incorporating in their day-to-day, being able to hammer some points down to be better. That would be my wish. So it's 1:00. Looks like we're all set to wrap up. Today has been very good talk. Thank you guys for joining me on this. Another session down. It's been great. I'm glad I'm able to have the support of my brilliant team. I'm nothing without them. They make me better. They make me smarter. They compliment me. They allow me to lead with purpose and intention, and they allow me to make mistakes, apologize, be a better leader for them and because of them. And I'm really happy. Mike, Allison, Jillian, Anise, you guys are my stars. Really appreciate you guys for everything. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Cool. Any last thoughts, last words? See you guys next week on another edition of LinkedIn Live with the Wilkinson Firm. Have a great rest of your Friday. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.